Hey guys, welcome back to more HOA stories. In this Ripestories Reddit video, imagine moving into your dream lake house and 2 days later the HOA fines you for fishing on your private property and having a boat. They claimed the dock belonged to the HOA, but when I checked the property records, I discovered something that changed everything. And the first one is titled, Homeowner Association fined me for fishing and owning a boat. I own the land and taught them a lesson. So I bought a small place on a lake. It's a small house with a yard and a bit of shoreline and a view that sold me the second I stepped out back. The listing mentioned an easement for lake access, but my agent told me it was just legalese dealing with utility lines and boundary quirks around water. I skimmed the survey that came with the purchase and saw nothing scary and then closed on the place. I was excited to have a spot to fish after work and maybe take the little fishing boat out on the weekends. I learned very quickly that the neighborhood had an HOA, the seller disclosed it, and I figured, okay, it covers snow plowing the road and maintaining the little park at the entrance. My previous place had one as well, and it was not awful. My new neighbor on the first day, an older guy who does woodworking in his garage, told me, "They are active around here." He said it in that polite way, people warn you without getting themselves into trouble. I asked what active meant, and he laughed and said that I would find out when I set anything down that looks like a boat. And yeah, it took them 2 days. I keep my boat on a small trailer tucked by my garage. It is a beat-up thing I've had since forever, and I don't run a motor larger than what the lake allows. Furthermore, I've got a fishing license that is current and I pick up after myself. I'm boring in the best ways, you could say. So then on day 2, I take a couple casts in the evening and I'm standing on this old wooden dock that butts right up into the water from the side of my property. It is kind of weathered and grey and there's a path down to it that splits from the yard. I thought it was charming and loved that someone before me had built it. And I'm out there tossing a little spinner, minding my own business, when this golf cart barreling along the path from the community site chirps to a stop behind me. "Excuse me," she says in the tone that sounds like a car alarm. There's a woman in a bright visor and a clipboard. I will call her the president because she introduced herself as such in the next breath. "I'm the HOA president. You cannot fish here." I thought she was joking. I said, I'm on my own property and it's a lake." "You are at the community dock," she snaps. "Fishing is by permit only. Residents buy access through the HOA." I look around. There's a small sign with the HOA name and a phone number nailed to a post by the path. The dock has no other markings. It's at the waterline where my yard slopes down, and I point at my house. That is my place. I just closed on it. She looks past me at the water and then back at me like I'm some story she cannot wait to tell at a meeting. "Welcome to the neighborhood. Regardless, there are rules. Fishing from the community dock requires a permit. We also don't allow boat storage visible from the street." I blinked. "The boat is in my driveway," I say, "not the street, and I have a fishing license." She makes a note on her board like she's a meter maid and then says, "That's not how it works here. We have our own rules. There's a fine for fishing without a permit and a fine for storing a boat in view. You will receive an invoice." What? I literally laughed because I thought she was messing with the new guy. "There's no community dock on my property and you don't get to make your own fishing licenses." She goes, "It's been the community dock for years. We maintain it, we set the rules, and if you refuse to comply, we will escalate." I said something not nice. It was not creative. She rolled off in the golf cart like she had written me up for existing. 2 days later, there it was in my mailbox. Violations. One for an illegal board stored in my driveway, and one for illegal fishing at community dock, and also one for unpermitted shoreline structure, which made no sense because the dock was there when I closed it, and I didn't build a single thing. Total dues was a few $100 with a warning that non-payment would result in additional remedies. It came with a grainy photo of me standing on the dock holding a rod taken from somewhere in the tree line where the path comes through. They had slapped a sticker on my mailbox too, which was a nice touch. My wife read it and said, "We knew there was an HOA. Are you just gonna pay this and make it go away?" I said no, because I don't like paying for imaginary problems. And by the way guys, just to quickly interject here, as veterans of HOA stories from Reddit, what would you have done in this situation? Would you have instantly paid the HOA fine? Or would you have waited like OP? Also, if you still enjoy the HOA stories, please don't forget to like the video and let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. Thank you so much for the support. I emailed the address at the bottom of the paper and politely asked for the specific rule that said I could not have my boat under a certain size in my driveway, the specific rule that said the HOA could require a permit for fishing on a state-regulated lake, and the authority for calling a dock on my land a community dock. I also asked what they meant by unpermitted shoreline structure, since it was pre-existing and on my deed description. The reply came in all kinds of self-important speak. They said my craft violated community aesthetics and had to be out of public view, which to them meant inside a garage. They said the community dock was maintained by them and they had the right to regulate its use. They said I needed to submit an application for any shoreline features and get written permission, and that I needed their permission to fish off the dock because it interfered with other residents' enjoyment. And by the way, guys, can someone find these HOA Karens for interfering with the enjoyment of life of normal people? Anyway, I wrote back again, still polite, and asked them to point me to the exact document clause regarding boat storage, and I said I would comply if it was legit. I also asked them to show me the recorded deed or easement that gave them control of the dock or any part of my shoreline. I asked what statute they were relying on to regulate fishing, and there was silence for a week. Then a new invoice, and this time with late fees for the previous violations, and a note saying they would send it to collections if I did not pay. There's only so much you can do arguing with a wall. I went to my neighbor with the garage tools and asked him to tell me what the story was. He grinned and said, "You met her, huh?" He told me the dock had been there forever, that people used it, and the HOA said it was a community amenity. He never liked that they called it theirs. We all just went along, he said, because it was easier. They charge a yearly fee for lake access. I don't really fish, so I never paid. So to be clear here, they were charging folks to use a dock that they might not even own, and they were trying to charge me for fishing because it was a community space. This is where my actual job helped me. I'm not a lawyer, but I work with property records for a living. I'm comfortable reading deeds and easements and staring at plats until my eyes hurt. The deed to my place came with a basic boundary survey, but not a recent one. The listing had an old diagram. I sat at the dining table with my laptop and started pulling up the county GIS, the tax maps, and anything recorded related to my parcel. I called the title company and asked for the full file. Then I spent an evening knee-deep in documents. The more I looked, the more something weird popped out. The dock was in this gray area on the general map. The path that led to it curved along behind my yard and looked like it cut through my lot, but the map was too fuzzy to be sure. If the HOA had an easement for access, it would be in the records, so I searched the recorded easements. There were two on my place, one for utility lines near the road and one small one at the side for drainage that had nothing to do with the lake. Nothing gave anyone access to put a public walkway or public dock on my shoreline. I thought that maybe I was reading it wrong, so I hired an actual surveyor to come out and stake the property fully. If I was gonna push back, I wanted it to be correct. I told the surveyor that I was dealing with an HOA calling a dock community property and that I wanted the property lines to the water's edge marked clearly. The surveyor then shows up with two guys and some bright tape. They spent the better part of a day walking around looking at old iron pins at corners, measuring from monuments, and eventually one of them waves me over. "So here's your back line," he says, pointing to a fresh stake by a scrubby bush. And here, he walks 20 or 30 feet along, is the northwest point, the dock. He says, pointing down, where it attaches to the shore. "That is inside your line, not just inside though, completely." "Completely, I say?" And he nods. "The whole thing from shore to water is on your parcel. There's no recorded easement for HOA access to this dock on your deed that we could find." I ask, "What about the path?" He smiles like he has seen this in movies before. He shows me where the path cuts through, and it is also on my land. So there's no easement recorded for people to cross. He marks the corners of my lot as they meet the water and then flags the path line as it crosses my property. "I will have your sealed drawing ready in a couple days," he says. "I'd be careful letting people keep using this if there's any liability." I paid him and gave him a tip because I felt like I'd just bought the winning lottery ticket, not because I wanted to be a jerk, but because it meant I was not crazy. It meant all the posturing from the golf cart Karen was hot air. That night I walked the path for the first time, really looking at it. The HOA had done some weekend warrior improvements over the years, some old railway ties as steps, a mulch strip, a couple of solar lights stuck in the dirt. My property line stakes were now bright flags cutting right across it. At the shore end, my line wrapped fully around the dock foundation where these old posts were sunk into a little rocky berm. Boats came and went daily, teenagers jumped off in the summer, folks took family photos at sunset, and yeah, I was not trying to be a villain here. But I also wasn't gonna get shaken down in my own yard by people who made up fishing permits while squatting on my land. I wrote the HOA again calmly, and I said I had hired a licensed surveyor to confirm boundaries and that the survey showed the community dock was within my property. I said there was no recorded easement for HOA access, path or use of my shoreline or dock. I said I'd be happy to discuss a fair license agreement if they wanted to continue using it, but in the meantime, they needed to cease sending me fines for fishing and boat storage and rescind the violations. I attached a letter from the surveyor saying the full drawing was forthcoming, and the reply was instant this time. It was not even subtle. "We reject your claims," they said. "The community has used that dock for years. That creates a right. We maintain it, and it is not your private dock." I then responded saying, "Long-term use does not invent a property right. If you're claiming some legal doctrine, please cite. Until then, stop telling me that I cannot fish in my own yard." They sent me another fine the next day for harassment of board members. It was like arguing with a toddler holding a checkbook. Then came the annual dock fee email to all residents, a cheerful newsletter telling people to renew their lake access for the summer by paying the HOA a set amount. The money the note claimed went to maintain the dock and shoreline. It listed dates for dock keys pickup like they had a rotation of keys. It included a schedule for dock fishing time slots. And yeah, I'm reading this like it's satire. I kept scrolling and there it is, a casual line at the end that said, "As always, our beloved community dock is available to all members in good standing." Probably in good standing with the homemade HOA social score system. Anyway, please respect the posted rules and do not fish without a permit. I don't know what made me snap here. Maybe it was the tone, like they were doing everyone a favor. Maybe it was the idea that they'd been collecting dock fees for who knows how long on my property while telling me that I couldn't fish in my own yard. But either way, I decided if they wanted to be professional, I could be even more professional. So I called an attorney that I've used in the past for a small business dispute before. I explained the situation, sent him my closing docs and the surveyor's letter, and asked what my options were. He said the magic words, "Do you want to keep letting them use it or not?" I said, "Not under these conditions." And by the way, guys, if you would be in this situation, would you let the HOA keep using your private property or would you stop/ban their access? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, he drafted a demand letter. It was short, polite and very clear. The dock and the access path were in my land. The HOA had no recorded right to use it. They had collected fees for access using my property without permission. We demanded they stop representing it as a community asset, rescind my fines, and pay a license fee for the past use. I told him to include an invoice. He then asked me how far back I wanted to go, and we decided to use their own number. I mean, if they'd been charging residents a set fee for the last, say, 15 years, the neighbor thought it was at least that long, then they owed me at least a reasonable land use value, not necessarily the whole amount they collected, but something sizable. My attorney suggested a per-year land use fee at a fair market rate plus interest. It was not stupid money, but it was nothing, and it was enough to sting a lot. We then sent the certified letter, then we waited, and the president showed up at my door the next afternoon with 2 other board members, one of whom looked like he hadn't wanted to be a part of this field trip, and she held the letter like it offended her fingers. "You think you can extort us with this?" she said as soon as I opened the door. I said, "It is not extortion, it's a bill. You've been using my property without permission and charging people for access. That's not how any of this works." She said, "We built that dock. We maintain it. It is for all residents. You don't get to ban the community from the lake." I said, "I'm not banning anyone from the lake. I'm banning them from my land. Big difference. If it's a community dock, show me the recorded document." She glared at me and then said, "We will not pay your ridiculous invoice. If you try to block access, we will sue you for harassment and damages. We will put a lien on your house." The quiet guy with her cut in and said, Let's not threaten litigation on his porch." I said, "Look, I'm willing to do a license agreement if you stop harassing me and pay something for the 15 years of using my property. If you prefer not to, then the dock is closed until it is resolved." She pointed at me like she was crowning me the villain of the cul-de-sac. "You will not touch that dock. People depend on it. You touch it and I'll have the sheriff here." "Cool," I said. "I will let my lawyer know that we are at an impasse. Have a good day." She stomped off muttering. The other guy gave me a look that was half apology, half, "This is gonna be ugly." and followed her. 2 days later, my attorney got a response from a lawyer representing the HOA that basically said, no. They claimed implied easement by long-term use, community maintenance, and some nonsense about common area established by practice. It read like they were hoping I would just pay the fines and go away. Their letter ended with, "Our client will continue to access and use the dock and path as before. Any attempt to interfere will be met with immediate legal action." My attorney called and said, "How attached are you to being friends with your neighbors?" I said, "I tried, but I am done." He said, "Okay." We talked about risk. He reminded me that I couldn't remove the dock in a way that would be unsafe or damage the shoreline. He suggested a cleaner move: post no trespassing signs along the property line facing the path and physically block the path and dock with a lockable gate or chain at the start of my property boundary. "You are not destroying the dock," he said, "you're just denying access. Let them take you to court if they want. They will lose unless they can produce a recorded right." He said we should notify them first, so that is what we did. Another letter, this one with a date: starting next week, the path and dock would be closed to HOA members and the public. Any access across my property would be trespassing. The letter quoted the survey's legal description and attached a sealed drawing. The day before the closure date, I went to the hardware store, bought a roll of heavy chain, 2 high-quality padlocks, and a stack of red and white no trespassing signs. I also bought posts and clamps. My neighbor with the garage tools came over and helped me sink 2 posts at the property line where the path enters my yard. We ran the chain between them and set a gate latch with a lock. We put signs at eye level along the path and one right by the dock path entrance. It said private property, no trespassing. We kept it neat and unaggressive, just clear. Then I took a piece of angle iron and a chain and looped it through the handrail at the top of the dock and locked it to a buried anchor. It felt ridiculous to have to do this on my own land, but better ridiculous than paying an HOA to fish. The next morning was a show. I was pouring coffee when I heard voices outside escalating in volume. I step out and there's a small crowd of people at the chain across the path. Some had fishing poles, a couple had lawn chairs. They were yanking at the chain. "What is this?" one woman yelled. "Who did this?" The president's golf cart came buzzing up. She got out and did this big arm sweep saying, "Everyone, please step back, we will handle this." She points at me like I am an invading army. "Unlock this immediately," she says. "You're violating community rules." "It is my property," I said. "The dock is closed, the path is closed, and your board was notified. Use another access point." "Well, there is no other access point," a guy from the crowd blurted. "Not my problem." Out loud I said, "Not my problem." The president starts grandstanding about tradition and rights, and my neighbor from across the way, bless him, piped up with, "Actually, the survey stakes are right there. This is his property." The president turned on him like a storm. "You're not helping," she hissed. She called the sheriff, and I watched her do it because she made a show of it. To the credit of the deputy who showed up, he was calm. He walked the path, looked at the stakes, looked at the signs, and then said to the president, "Ma'am, this appears to be his property. There's no criminal violation here. This is a civil matter. If you think you have an easement." She tried to argue. He told her, "If you have a recorded easement, show it to your attorney. Otherwise, you cannot force this man to let you pass." Then he left. The crowd dispersed in that disbelieving way where people thought I'd done something wrong because they were inconvenienced. A teenager threw a pebble at the lake like he wanted to skip it across my forehead. Everyone muttered. The president glared like she could set my house on fire by just looking at it. By evening, I had an email blast from the HOA saying the dock was temporarily closed due to a dispute and that the board would be taking appropriate legal action. They called my actions unneighborly and selfish, and they told people not to engage with me and to report any harassment I committed. Someone had clearly decided if they said harassment enough times, it would become true. What they did not do was produce proof that they had the right to use or trespass my property, if that's even possible in any way. Day 2 of no dock access was quieter though. Day 3, I noticed a guy jog down the path, stop at the chain, look around, and then attempt to climb past it. My wife yelled out the window, "Please don't trespass," and he flipped us off and kept going. I called the non-emergency line and said politely that a trespasser had entered our property after posted warnings, and the responding deputy was the same guy from the first day. He recognized the situation and he asked the runner to leave. The runner tried to argue that he paid for this dock, and the deputy asked for the easement again and then shrugged when the guy didn't have it. No arrest, just a "don't come back." I didn't want to arrest a jogger anyway. I wanted the HOA to feel the pain, not just random residents, and the pain came fast. Residents who had paid the dock fee for the season started wondering what they had paid for. People who fished for relaxation were now out of luck. Parents who brought their kids to jump in on hot afternoons suddenly had no safe place to do it because the shoreline elsewhere was privately owned or swampy, and the HOA started getting phone calls, emails, and probably a lot of halfway side eyes. On day number 4, the board called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. I went because, why not? I sat in the back and listened. The president stood up front with a big printout of a map that looked like it had been designed by someone who skipped geometry class. And maybe she not only skipped that one. She pointed at a dark blob and said, "This is the community dock," then waved at a lighter blob and said, "This is Mr. New Resident's parcel." It was nonsense. I waited my turn to speak, and when they finally let me, I said, "I have a sealed survey that shows the dock is entirely on my parcel. There's no recorded easement." "You have been charging residents for access you don't even have the right to give," people murmured. A woman in the second row said, "So we've been paying you for nothing?" One of the board members coughed like he was choking on air. The president snapped that they maintained the dock and that counted as something. Another resident, an older guy with a fisherman's tan, said, "We paid for access to a dock you don't own. How does that not make you liable?" The board lawyer who was there tried to calm it down by talking about long-standing use and prescriptive easements, and here's where having a job that deals with property helps. I raised my hand again and said, "You don't get a prescriptive easement against a property where you've been trespassing with the owner's permission or without outright hostility, and even if you did try to claim one, it would be a court process and not something you just declare in a newsletter. Also, you cannot claim a prescriptive easement and simultaneously bill me for violations of your rules on that same piece of land you don't even own." The room turned, the president glared. The lawyer looked at me like I was ruining his smooth speech. I added, "I sent you a demand letter with an offer to license the dock. You refused, you chose this. My lawyer will be happy to discuss a new arrangement if you want to negotiate in good faith." I left after that because the room started to feel like a pot about to boil. On my way out, 2 different residents caught me and whispered that they were on my side. One told me, "They've been milking this for years." He said he had asked once where the money for the dock maintenance went and got yelled at in a meeting for being negative. Over the next week, the HOA tried a different tactic: guilt and pressure. I got notes on my door asking me to think of the kids, and I got one printed thing that said, "It takes a village," which made my wife cackle, and I also got a certified letter saying that the HOA was initiating legal proceedings and that I should expect to be served. My attorney told me to just relax. He said they are posturing. If they had a recorded easement, they would have attached it to their first letter. Without it, they are dead in the water. And he was right about the posturing. We never got served because there was really nothing to serve. Instead, we got a second letter from their lawyer trying to compromise. If I reopened the dock immediately, they would waive my fines for fishing and the boat. I read it twice to make sure I caught that. They wanted to waive fines for things they had no authority to even fine me for, in exchange for me giving back the thing they did not own. I wrote back through my attorney, "Pay the back land use fee for the years you represented the dock as a community asset, sign a license agreement for future use at a fair rate, rescind all violations and publicly correct your statements about the dock. Then we will talk about reopening." There was silence and then anger and then some truly wild rumors. Apparently, I was suing the neighborhood, I was trying to evict the community from the lake, and one lady told my wife at the grocery store that her son used to jump off that dock when he was little, and now he couldn't because "you people don't like children." My wife said, "We didn't close the lake, we closed our yard," and then walked off before she said something that would make it weird at the store forever. 2 residents came by in the evenings to talk to me privately. Both of them were tired of the HOA's nonsense. One said he had been on the board years ago and had asked about the dock ownership question and gotten steamrolled by the then president and the current one, who were apparently best friends. He said he didn't have proof, just an old email chain that got deleted when the board changed the system. The other resident said that he and his son used the dock a ton and he would happily pay a small yearly fee directly to me if I reopened it, but he refused to give the HOA another dime after that. I told both of them, "I'm not trying to be a roadblock, I just don't want to be extorted in my own yard. If this resolves, I will probably reopen it, but in a way that is legal." After 3 more weeks of a quiet dock and increasingly grouchy HOA blasts, the dam broke. I got a real letter from a real law firm, different from the one they'd been using before. It was shorter, more sober. It said the board had hired them to advise on the issue and that they had reviewed the survey and the recorded documents and that they recommended the board cease representing the dock as a community asset, and it proposed a meeting to negotiate a license for the dock and path. It also asked me to submit my invoice again for the past year's land use so they could discuss settlement. In other words, after a month of bluster, they blinked, we negotiated, we did it at the law firm's conference room with my attorney on one side, their new attorney on the other, and the president and 2 board members across from me, and me pretending that my leg was not vibrating under the table from the adrenaline. My attorney laid it out like a calm math problem, the survey, the lack of easement, the years of use without permission, the newsletter advertising the dog, the collected fees. He put my invoice in front of them with the number at the bottom. The president exploded. She accused me of greed, selfishness, and trying to profit off of the community. I didn't say anything because my attorney had told me beforehand, let me be the bad guy. He said, your client has profited off the community for 15 years by collecting fees for something they don't even own. The soft-spoken board member next to her rubbed his eyes. Their attorney tried to haggle the back fee down to a token amount. My attorney countered with a small concession on interest, but held the base. The new attorney asked if, in exchange for paying the back fee, I would sign a permanent easement granting the HOA access in perpetuity. My attorney said no, he would sign a revocable license agreement for a term, renewable yearly, with a right to terminate for cause. They argued, and we held. He also said the HOA had to publicly correct their statements about ownership and rescind my violations in writing. At one point, the president sneered and said, "Or we fight this in court. Our lawyer told us we have a good chance." Her own new attorney paused like he was deciding if it was worth being honest, and then said gently, "I would not recommend that. The lack of a recorded easement is a problem. You could see it hit some of them that the party was over." The board member who had been quiet the whole time finally asked if the HOA could install their own dock somewhere else on the shore, and the new attorney said, "Only if we own the land or get permission, and we don't." The board member muttered something about asking the park down the way if they would allow one, and the president threw up her hands and said, "We're not begging." We adjourned without a deal. My attorney told me, "Give them a week. They will call." And they called in 3 days. Apparently, word had gotten out more widely about the meeting. People whose kids were on summer swim teams, people who kayak, people who just like to sit with a book by the water, all realized the access was dead because the board refused to negotiate. Folks started showing up to board meetings in numbers the board was not even used to. Someone posted in the neighborhood forum saying, "Why did we pay for dock access if the HOA never owned the docks?" Someone else chimed in and said, "I want my money back." And then a third, "I asked the board last year where the funds went and got told to stop being negative." And then the president sent me an email at midnight that was peak riled up. It said, "We will pay a settlement for back use if you reopen immediately. We will discuss a license afterwards." My attorney said no immediate anything without paper, and we told them to send a counteroffer in writing. And eventually we settled on a number for back use that was most of what I asked for, and a 1-year license with renewal options. It included a clause that they had to stop calling it the community dock and instead call it licensed dock on private property. It included specific rules for hours that I set, no late-night partying, a cap on the number of guests at once, and a fee schedule paid to me as the licensor, and a requirement that the HOA provide liability insurance naming me as additional injured. It also included a clause that if they fined me for any of my normal use of my property, I could terminate the license immediately. And it required a public apology and rescission of all violations. We signed, and they cut the settlement check. I deposited it and watched it clear, and then and only then I took the lock off the chain, opened the dock back up. I kept the private property signs because, they were accurate, and I made a new sign that said, "Dock access by license only. For info, contact HOA." Because I didn't want randoms wandering down, the HOA sent out a correction to the entire neighborhood that was so grudging it was basically a hostage note. It said, "The dock at the lake is located on private property and is not owned by the HOA. We have entered into a license agreement that allows members to use it. We apologize for any confusion about ownership." It also had a paragraph buried in the middle saying they had rescinded my violations due to a misunderstanding. The residents who paid dock fees for years started talking about refunds. I didn't start that, by the way. I didn't have to. A couple of them got together, pulled as many old emails as they could, got copies of newsletters, invoices, and meeting notes, and put together a stack of evidence that showed the HOA had been misrepresenting the dock for at least a decade. They asked the board for an accounting of where the dock fees had gone, and the board gave them a 1-page summary that said maintenance and upkeep and insurance with round numbers. and the residents asked for receipts. Then they voted to hold a special meeting to remove the president for cause. When it came time for the vote, the room was tense. The president made a speech about tradition and community and how one person with a grudge should not be allowed to ruin what they had built. They passed out slips of paper, people voted, and the result was not even close. She was removed as president and from the board. The soft-spoken guy took over as interim and said that they'd be doing a full financial review and reporting back. You could feel the oxygen come back into the room. The next week, a new email went out saying the board had engaged a CPA to review the last several years of dog fee income and expenditure, and they were gonna be transparent. They also quietly changed the aesthetic rules about boats to say that as long as a boat was maintained and didn't stick out into the street, it was fine. I did not miss my chance to reply, of course. Thanks for aligning with common sense. The accountant's report eventually came out. It said that the HOA had collected dog fees for over a decade, but that most of the money had just gone into the general fund. Some had paid for an insurance rider, which they didn't need because it didn't apply to a property they didn't even own, and some had paid for those sad little solar lights on the path. Some had paid for a pressure washing of the dog that my neighbor remembered, as one of the board members' nephews borrowing a power washer for a Saturday. Anyway, there wasn't straight up embezzlement, just sloppiness and hubris, and people treating other people's money like it was a game. They did what they could to make it right. They gave anyone who asked a partial credit on their next year's dues, and they posted receipts going forward for any maintenance claims. And me, well, as mentioned before, I got my settlement check for the back land use and a reasonably priced yearly license fee that I required they pay at the start of the season in a lump sum. They pay, I open. They don't, I lock. And I fish whenever I want to. And now we will read 2 comments from Reddit. The first one said, "I cannot believe the comments here. You are clearly the a-hole. You knew exactly what you were doing when you bought a house with a community dog that has been used by the entire neighborhood for over 15 years. Just because your surveyor found some boundary quirk doesn't give you the right to hold the whole neighborhood summer hostage because you got your feelings hurt over a couple small fines. Also, you admit that the HOA maintained the dog and put in the path and so on, steps and lights, and they clearly put in the work while you just swooped in and decided to be the get off my lawn guy. You literally chained up a dog that kids use to jump into the lake just to squeeze a settlement out of your neighbors. You extorted your neighbors and the HOA. That's one way to make yourself the most hated person in the cul-de-sac. Have fun fishing alone, while everyone else at the grocery store whispers about that guy who closed the lake for a payday." Comment number 2 said, "Honestly, this is why people hate HOAs. They literally tried to fine you for fishing on your own property and then had the audacity to charge the entire neighborhood dog fees for a structure they didn't even own. That is not just active, that is straight up fraud in my opinion." And yeah guys, I would be on that side as well, I would agree here. You tried to be civil by asking for the deed and suggesting a license agreement early on, but they decided to double down with harassment fines and golf cart power trips. If they'd just been neighborly and admitted they just made a mistake when you showed them the survey, you probably would have worked something out. But instead, they threatened to lien your house over a dock that is 100% on your land. You did not ban the community, you just stopped a private criminal organization from selling access to your backyard. The fact that the board got cleaned out and they are finally doing a financial audit shows that you actually did the whole neighborhood a huge favor by exposing the president's weekend warrior accounting. Enjoy your boat OP and your spinner. You truly earned it. And yeah guys, thanks for watching. I will see you again tomorrow.